everyone, this is Emmy Peterson from Expat TV. I'm also the founder of The Bridge EC Relocation. Today I wanted to take a moment to quickly introduce you to Jane Nguyen, who's our lovely guest on Expat TV today. She's an author, speaker, and transformational relationship and dating coach. Jane's also the go-to girl for people who want to experience transformational change in their relationships. Using her signature feminine power coaching method in her programs, workshops, and retreats, Jane teaches strong, independent, and powerful women how to tap more into their feminine essence and shine from the inside and out, to attract a man and a relationship that allows them to be all they can be. Jane is a proud author of her book Honeymoon Forever and a contributing author of no more than 3 other books that bring love, light, and inspiration to our world. So hello, lovely Jane, and thank you for joining us today on Expat TV. I am so excited to chat to you again. We've covered some really great topics together, and today we're going to talk about international students or being an exchange student overseas. And you've kindly offered to share your experience. So would you like to share with our viewers a little bit about how come you decided to go overseas to study?
First of all, thank you for having me here. It's an amazing conversations that we always have, and the fact that I get to share my personal experience and when it comes to be an international student, what a privilege. Seems like such a long time ago. The reason why I came to Australia was a time out of my decision or control. It wasn't my decision at all. In fact, it was my mum's decision to send me here. And I guess for a lot of families in developing countries, sort of the thought of sending their children overseas, first of all, is for their own, I guess, personal benefits of, being independent. You learn from the culture, you learn from the people, and there's a lot more future opportunities to be overseas. For example, if I were to still be in Vietnam now, I would have been married with 5 kids. I wouldn't have a career of my choice, and probably been married to someone who's really drunk and abusive. So I guess from that perspective, I think it was a great decision that Mum got to send me here. And it was very difficult for her at the time, as it was for me. And I think sometimes we forget the sort of the massive cultural difference when we make those decisions. So it's definitely been a journey for me.
Yeah. So how old were you when you actually first came to Australia?
14.
14. So you would have been, quite, teenager. You were going through all the things that comes with teenagehood and coming to Australia. What were some of the, obviously you've shared a little bit about the background there. What were some of the biggest challenges that came up for you quite early on in your journey with coming to Australia?
I think for me, the number one biggest challenge was the language. I didn't know any English at the time, so they had to be very creative in terms of using my own body language to express what I want. And it was hard to really express your opinion, your feelings, because I didn't know what words to describe them. And at the time, you sort of, when you first came here, and you sort of felt like out of place because people didn't really know you. You didn't really know them. Are they friendly? Are they enemies? And I was sort of felt like I was alone. Like, in a way, felt like I was being abandoned by my family, because at the time I didn't have the knowledge or understanding of the sacrifices they've made for me to come here.
Yeah.
I guess that would be my biggest challenge. And, the cultural differences was massive for me. To go from eating rice and noodles every day to completely eating barbecue stuff, for dinner every day was a massive cultural difference. And at times, I cried because I didn't know how long I could cope. But over time, you sort of learn to adapt yourself into the culture, and you sort of, I guess, I took things a lot less personally,
Yeah.
because people wasn't there to attack me or tried to get rid of me. They was as, I get threatened as I was, because they didn't really know me or, the cultural difference that I had.
So how long do you reckon for you, because 14 is obviously a pretty delicate age, and people come as exchange students of all various ages, and so I'm just wondering, how long did it take before you got to that point where you kind of felt almost like you could relax a little bit, and that same point people go to where it's like, oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, 9 to 12 months for me, I would say, where I sort of, I guess the first 3-4 months was more for the adaptive stage, where you sort of sorting out, is it a threat or is it just sort of, a friendly thing? And then from that point, it's about, okay, I survived. Next is, how do I thrive? And it was, for me, was to learn more about the language. How do I learn to communicate what I want? So more very survival stage from the, when I first arrived to sort of 9 months mark. And after 9 months, when you got really familiar with the culture, I had friends at the time. So having the groups of friends and support, and I was staying in a host family where they were really nice and friendly, and they were sort of showing me, and they took me, to Ballarat, to see the kangaroos and all of that. So I felt like, okay, I have the support that I needed to survive. And probably after the 3-year mark, that's where I felt like, okay, this is home. That took me that long.
Yeah. I mean, that it is quite a journey, and I don't think everyone appreciates it. And I also think it's a little bit different. We probably should make a distinction here. Like, it's a different thing if you go as an exchange student for, a 6-month or a 3-month exchange or something, versus what you did, which is that you came to stay for the duration of your education. So that's obviously a pretty big thing. And I mean, 3 years, I wouldn't say that's not, I wouldn't say that's very unusual. I've worked with a lot of expat clients who move as adults after they finish studying. And even for them, it takes anywhere between 12 months up to 2 or 3 years before they really feel part of the community and all that sort of stuff. One thing I often hear with exchange students, and I've got a bit of my own experience here as well, is that you tend to gravitate to other students from your country or your part of the world, only because it's a little bit easier while you're going through all that change to understand the language, the food you miss, the culture, the weather, whatever it might be. How did you find that?
It was exactly the same experience I had, where, at the school that I went to, there was a group of Vietnamese students, and we hung around a lot, mainly because I guess you sort of miss the culture, and hanging around them sort of remind you that actually it's still a part of me. And at the time, it was easier to sort of learn to express yourself in that way, because you sort of compensate for things you couldn't say in English. So it was really, really great. But at the same time, I was quite mindful of the interactions I had with the Vietnamese students compared to the Australian students. I knew at the time the intention for me here is to learn to adapt and sort of create my life here. So I interacted also with a lot of students and teachers outside my community. And I remember when I started doing the part-time work, that was when I learned the most, because I sort of get exposed to, I guess the real world. And that was, for me, was a learning curve to realise that I can't always speak Vietnamese, and I need to start learning to think and speak in English and make it my priority. And that was the turning point for me with language.
Yeah, that's really cool. And I think for a lot of people, that's usually the strongest driver to learn a language. Like, if you're feeling left out, or if you feel like you don't quite understand things, or people don't quite understand you, it's usually enough of a pain point to leverage you to go, actually, I'm going to knuckle down, I'm going to study, and I'm going to get this.
Yeah.
Another thing that I think is really cool about international students, which I've noticed seems to be pretty much a global pattern, is when you get to the stage, not only about the language, but about performance.
Yeah.
Because let's face it, studying is about, you know, whatever type of school you're in, you'd be graded in some sort of way. And I remember my study experience overseas was different to yours. So I actually went overseas at university level to study in the UK. And I actually ended up writing my bachelor thesis whilst in the UK. And I remember that being, even though I spoke decent English at the time and all that sort of stuff, I found it very, very hard to be graded. And having, you know, my bachelor thesis being graded in a country and writing it in something that wasn't my mother tongue, I found that very, very challenging. So I was wondering in terms of, you know, what were your observations around the whole being graded or being judged to some extent, I guess, by a system that you're not used to?
Yep. It's a great question because that's exactly what I experienced. I felt that people couldn't really understand what I was writing. Like, you know, you talk about literature, and in Vietnamese we express our thoughts and opinion in a different way. So more conservative, and we look at the more objective versus here you can, you know, you have the freedom of speech. You can say, you know, it sucks or whatever. So that's sort of the difference in that create this, I guess, this feeling that, you know, at times I felt like I wasn't good enough because, you know, I wasn't, you know, A+ student in Vietnam in pretty much every subject since I came here, and then you sort of get a C and you go like, what the F? And it was a lot of learning curve to realise that it's okay. It was a part of the learning, and was quite interesting for, I guess, you know, for a lot of Asian students, you know, you think about all the subjects that didn't involve English and how they did so well, because I guess at the time to express myself, you know, in English writing was difficult. So I stuck with maths and physics and chemistry and all the things that didn't actually involve writing. And a lot of students would do that. You sort of stick to what you're already great at. But when I went to uni, I sort of realised that I couldn't really just choose a subject anymore. Yeah. And I actually had to be more flexible around, okay, I really need to learn how to write thesis and how to do the proper assignments. So it created, again, another learning curve to be more flexible around and be observant of how people write and what's good and what's not. So there was a lot of reading around the style of writing as well. So yeah, again, it's a journey, and you sort of have these hiccups along the way that sort of question your where you're at and your being and what you can do differently. And unless you embrace the journey and those hiccups, you will always have the challenges.
Yeah. And it's, you know, it's an interesting thing because whatever age we are, I mean, studying and going to school is one of those things that, you know, you're always going to grow throughout that, and you're going to learn things. And, you know, gradually, even for us in Sweden, we study a third language, so we learn English quite young, but then we usually study a third language by age 12, 13, 14, something like that. And I remember, you know, the first lesson, I studied German at school, and I remember the first lesson and the teacher was trying to speak to us, and we obviously understood nothing. And then 4 or 5 years later, when we could actually watch a TV program and pick out most of the things, what they were saying. So I think it's really important to acknowledge yourself, I guess, in that way that, you know, you go from not knowing a lot about something and you're taken through an education system, whether you like that system or not. You do come out learning things at the other end. And one thing I think is really beautiful with what you shared is what you learn about yourself and your own ability to overcome and make new friends and find solutions. And especially if you don't understand the language, you've got to get really creative.
Yeah, definitely.
How are you going to go about it, right? So this is an amazing topic, and we could talk about this for weeks. But I'm really keen to leave our viewers here, whether they are international students themselves, they might have children going to international school. What are sort of the 2 or 3 biggest learnings from your time as an international student that you'd kind of like to leave with people who might be just embarking upon their international thing?
I guess number 1 tip would be to be aware of the cultural differences, and I would recommend if you were to go to a different country, to find out as much information as possible around how people do things, what sort of food they eat, to get familiar with those differences. You don't get the culture shock. And there's a lot of blogs these days, and even, you write a lot of blogs around, dealing with those, I guess, the relocation challenges.
Mm.
And I think to find out as much information as possible would be number one tip. The second one is also prepare yourself emotionally as well. This is something people never told me. And through my journey, I would be to actually sit back and go, who do you want to be in a new culture? With dealing with people that you don't know, how would you want things to flow, and how flexible are you willing to be when you hit those challenges. Third is there's always support around you. So don't be afraid to ask the questions. Don't be afraid to, because a lot of people feel like, it's silly if I ask, those questions. So they never ask and they never learn. So be curious, just ask lots of questions. Don't be afraid that people think of you that, it's so simple. How come you don't know? Of course I don't know. I've never lived here. So, and just reach out. There's so much support around you. Find a community that you can be a part of, and the more social you are, the easier it gets for you to adapt to the culture.
Absolutely. I think that is, all those tips are fantastic. So thanks for sharing those. I think, the one thing that stands out for me and that I hear time and time again with my clients, whether they're students or not, is the whole concept of, so many people choose to suffer in silence, whether it's a big or a small thing, whether it's like, which phone company should I use, or a bigger thing, like I feel really lost. And I find it that for some people, it's actually easier to give up and go home than to ask a simple question and say, I'm really struggling with this, I'm feeling really homesick, or I don't quite understand this bit. And the one thing I guess to highlight is that all those little tiny questions, they add up in the end and become this massive pile of doubt and fear, or whatever it is for that person. And I think it's a beautiful thing that we're talking about here today. And I think, to give yourself permission to ask questions and appear a little bit stupid, just, I think, it's just kind of about getting over yourself, isn't it? And going, people don't actually care that much about me, but they are willing to answer my questions, and I just need to ask them when I need to. Well, thank you, Jane. That was amazing. I love what you shared. To everyone here who's watching today, Jane does a lot of fantastic work on relationship with others and relationship with self. So we're going to leave some cool links and stuff at the end of this episode so you can connect with Jane. I really encourage you to. And thanks again, Jane, for being part of the show today.
Thank you for having me. It's always been a pleasure.
Thanks, hon.
Okay, bye.
Bye. Thank you, Jane, for an amazing conversation. I trust that you as a listener enjoyed that as much as we did. I would really encourage you to connect with Jane after the call via her website that you can see on the screen in front of you right now. She's got plenty of resources, including her beautiful book, that will really help you improve your relationships on your expat journey and beyond. All the best, and I'll chat to you soon.